Okay, it is exactly 10 o'clock, and I would like to welcome everyone who has joined us this morning. Welcome to the Cosmetics and Beauty Products webinar, hosted by the South African Consulate General in partnership with USAID and our industry partners. We are delighted that you could all join us this morning for this wonderful webinar that we're hosting, and we look forward to the discussions. To just deliver our opening remarks this morning, I would like to welcome the South African Consulate General in New York, Consul General Mutumisi Tawana, to share with us his welcome remarks. But before I do that, I will be introducing him. Mr. Mutumisi Tawana joined the Foreign Service of South Africa in 1998, and he assumed his current position as Consul General in New York on 16 January 2020. Prior to his appointment as Consul General, he was Director for Human Rights in the Foreign Service of South Africa in Pretoria. And he also served in the cabinet of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, DIRCO of South Africa. His previous assignments abroad include working at the Permanent Mission of South Africa to the United Nations in New York from 2007 to 2011, and in the political section of our embassy in Washington, D.C. from July 2001 to June 2006. Welcome, Consul General. We are delighted to have you this morning, and we look forward to the ideas that you will share with us and the words that you have for us this morning.
Thank you, Program Director. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar on cosmetics and beauty products hosted by the South African Consulate General in partnership with USAID and the Tshwane Economic Development Agency, TIDA. I take this opportunity to thank our guests from the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and Register Corps for responding so positively to our request to interact with the South African cosmetics and beauty industry. Allow me to acknowledge the collaboration from the industry associations such as SICOSA, the Cosmetic Export Council of South Africa, and the CTFA, the Cosmetic, Toiletry and Fragrance Association of South Africa. I also acknowledge the guidance and support that the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition continues to provide the consulate in terms of its work with regard to promoting trade with the United States. With us today, we'll also be joined by officials from the DTIC, who are based in Washington, D.C., Mr. Letswalo, and our colleague in Chicago, Ms. Shakira Motan. I believe our consuls generals and our deputy chief of mission will also join us from Washington, D.C., and the consul generals in Chicago and LA. Our ambassador Mfeketo, I believe, has prior commitments. She would have loved to also be part of this meeting. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to all companies joining us from South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. As you may be aware, the cosmetic and beauty industry is one of the priority sectors for growth and trade in South Africa. The industry is one of the biggest personal care markets on the African continent, and it employs about 50,000 people and contributes around 25,000 billion rand at the retail level and more than 5 billion rand at the manufacturing level. Ladies and gentlemen, as part of Sub-Saharan Africa, our countries are eligible to export products to the United States, market duty-free and quota-free under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. However, our utilization of AGOA benefits remain very low. I hope this webinar will assist both existing and potential exporters to understand and meet requirements in the United States so that you can take advantage of AGOA. The South African Consulate General in New York remains available and stands ready to provide support at zero cost through in-market information, advice on doing business in the US, that is export regulations, business to business matchmaking, facilitate outward selling and inward buying missions to South Africa, and trade show participation. In turn, the service is extended to US buyers who wish to source from South Africa by acquainting themselves with both the landscape and opportunities available in South Africa. I know that some of the companies that are participating in this webinar today were scheduled to attend the International Beauty Show New York in February this year, which was unfortunately canceled due to the pandemic outbreak. We, however, aim to continue working with you in terms of future events going forward. In closing, I look forward to participating in this webinar and to all the presentations that the speakers prepared for us. I once again welcome you to this important cosmetic and beauty webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Consul General Tawana, for those delightful words. It would be an anomaly if I did not acknowledge our special guest this morning to also deliver his opening remarks. On behalf of our partner, USAID Trade Hub, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Takele Tasu. Before he comes on board, I'd just like to briefly read his bio for you. Apologies for the delay. We were just changing the view from our screen so that you're able to see the speaker when they are speaking. I'm just waiting for Dr. Takele's bio to come up. Laissez-moi. Apologies for that glitch. Thank you very much. Dr. Takele? We lost it again for a moment. Thank you very much. Dr. Takele Tasu is Agriculture and Trade Advisor, USAID Southern Africa Regional Economic Growth Office. He's the coordinator for the Feed the Future initiative and the Regional Agriculture and Trade Advisor in the USAID Southern Africa Regional Economic Growth Office. In his role, he manages the activities of the USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub and the Seed Trade Project. Welcome to you, Dr. Tasu.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. Thank you, Council General Tawana. Thank you, representatives from CORE, FDA. It's my sincere pleasure to be here with you today in this important meeting. USAID, through its Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub, has been a proud partner to South African firms seeking to explore the US market under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or the AGOA. As many of you already know, AGOA offers exporters from 49 sub-Saharan African countries preferential treatment or preferential terms for accessing the US market. Currently, 39 countries are eligible. This includes exempted import duties on thousands of items, many of them lesser known than, say, your usual suspects, such as your textile and apparel, your specialty food, and others. The purpose of this our session today, therefore, is to explore one of those lesser known sectors, at least to us at the USA Trade and Investment Hub, that of cosmetics and beauty products. According to Allied Market Research, the size of the global estimated market is expected to reach 430 billion by 2022. That is in 2 years' time. In 2020 alone, the US cosmetics and beauty products market is estimated at 43 billion according to IBS World. So we believe at USAID, Southern African cosmetics and beauty products manufacturers are primed to be part of this growing and dynamic market. Assisting you to reach US consumers is one of key objectives of the USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub. To that end, today we are privileged. The USAID Trade Hub has organized a rare opportunity to hear directly, I might add, from experts at the US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. From them, we hope we'll learn more about the consumer safety and other requirements for accessing the US market. We are also privileged today to hear from USAID Trade Hub longtime partner, Register Corps. Thank you, which works with exporters to comply with FDA and other US market entry requirements. Finally, to applaud to our regional partners with us today, from trade and investment promotion agencies to business membership organization, I just want to say thank you for being part of this important session. I really do hope you will find today's deliberation meeting worth your time, worthwhile, something you will benefit. I thank you so much. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Tasu. Thank you both to Consul General Tawana and Dr. Tasu for the inspiring words that you've shared with us this morning. I think you have indeed set the tone for our discussions. Before we officially start the program, I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence and participation of our colleagues. As the Consul General indicated earlier, the Deputy Chief of Mission at our mission in Washington, Ms. Yoli Samvebe, our Consuls General in Chicago and LA, Ms. Mazibuka and Ms. Sundusa, our colleagues from the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition in Pretoria, Ms. Jonathan, Ms. Sina Musekla, and Ms. Paulina Mamohobo, our colleagues at the US Mission, Mr. Malusi Letsalo, Minister Economic, and Ms. Shakira Matan, the Trade Commissioner in Chicago. With that said, I would like to take this opportunity to then call on our industry partner representative, Mr. Floyd Moloko from Tshwane Economic Development Agency, to introduce himself and their industry partner, SICOSA. Mr. Moloko, over to you.
Good afternoon to the colleagues in South Africa, and good morning to the colleagues in New York. We are quite excited as Tshwane Economic Development Agency about this webinar today. And it is as a result of us having went to the New York International Beauty Show, where we had experienced challenges pertaining to the registration as per the FDA requirements. Then, given the fact that the mission was subsequently postponed, then we reverted back to having this webinar so that we can empower our companies with information regarding the FDA requirements, as of the view that the US is a huge market for South African companies, especially in the cosmetic sector. Then as TIDA and as myself, Floyd Muluku, responsible for export development, which we do through provision of export training and also through trade missions. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to have the FDA and Registrar Corp empowering our companies. And then we're not working alone, we're working together with our export council, SICOSA. And then I would like to hand over to Ms. Teresa Mola for her to introduce the export council. I thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Floyd. Thank you for including us. I know we have done quite a bit of work together, and part of it is getting into the USA market. And as Floyd rightly said, it has been challenges. So this is a tremendous opportunity for us to put our heads together and to see how we can work together and resolve some of the red tape and the issues that we're having in moving forward. Just as a background, I'd just like to give you maybe just a bit of information about SICOSA. SICOSA is the Cosmetics Export Council of South Africa. We are a non-profit organization. We are a Section 21, and we work with a public and private partnership with the Department of Trade and Industry and Commission, who are joint stakeholders with us. Our key objective is to strengthen the industry growth within the cosmetic sector, obviously to increase export growth for our members, to grow the export base through continued support, to encourage enterprise development of our small entrepreneurial manufacturers through our guidance and mentorship. And we do rely also on our provinces and assistance from Tshwane and some of our other provinces who's also come in as stakeholders to assist. And to ensure that the cosmetics industry continues to thrive and grow and make a difference. For us, it's about South Africa, it's about our members, it's about growth, it's about development. We want to facilitate and assist in export opportunities for South African companies. And we're looking at direct foreign investment into South Africa, which is highly probable with the relationship that South Africa does have with the US through the AGOA initiatives and through the assistance of all of our partners, both here, foreign partners, and all of our partners that we have in US. Who have also come and assisted us with many options that we've had and concerns that we've had. So yes, I think that we would certainly, like to be part of this, to be in the development stage with them, obviously by improving our trade relations between South Africa and the USA. We looked at the opportunity, and if I just say that the revenue of the US cosmetics industry estimated in 2019 to be between South Africa and the USA of close to 49-50 billion US dollars. And as CG said, and Dr. Takali said, there is a huge opportunity for South African cosmetics, healthcare, pharmaceutical, natural, organic, indigenous products. There's a huge opportunity for us into the US of A. Thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Teresa Mola, and thank you for sharing the role or the work of SICOSA. I'd like to also welcome next up our primary partner for the webinar, USAID Trade Hub, represented by Mr. Sim Dube, to introduce himself and USAID's industry partners. Mr. Simtube.
Good afternoon and good morning to all the participants. As USAID, we are very excited to be here, and I would love to maybe introduce myself. I'm Sim Dube, has been described to you and explained to yourselves, and the portfolio manager for Lesotho, Eswatini, and Mozambique at the USA Trade Hub. And I think it's very important to also talk briefly about what we are and what we do. So the USA Trade Hub works to increase sustainable economic growth, global export competitiveness, and trade in Southern Africa. And this is achieved by increasing exports from Southern African countries to South Africa and the US under AGOA. And the other big objective is boosting capital and technology flows from South Africa to other Southern African countries. And in all this work, we collaborate with various partners in the region. And today I would wish to acknowledge the attendance of other regional cosmetic industry partners at this webinar. From Namibia, we've got Ms. Dagmar Hornsbein, representing Namibia Network of Cosmetics Industry. And from Botswana, we have Dr. Georgia and Ms. Tudietso Tedape, my apologies, representing the National Products Association of Botswana. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of our longtime partners that have been explained before, the Registrar Corp, who shall be speaking later in the program. I thank you and look forward to a very productive collaboration at this webinar.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dube. It is now time to hand over to our speakers. It is my honor and pleasure to officially welcome our speakers and panel members for our session today, who I will introduce in the order of their presentation. We have Dr. Linda Katz, Director, Office of Cosmetics, Colors, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Welcome, Dr. Katz, and thank you for affording us this opportunity. Dr. Katz will be followed by Mr. John Verbeerten, who is Director, Division of Import Operations, Office of Enforcement and Import Operations, U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Welcome to you, Mr. John Verbeerten. He will be followed by Mr. Phil Hobson, who is founder and president of Phoenix International Business Logistics, the official freight forwarder and customs broker for the New York International Beauty Show. Welcome to you, Mr. Phil Hobson. From Registrar Corps, we've got Ms. Coley Anderson, who is Director, Industry and Government Relations, and she is accompanied by Ms. Ena Benavente, who is Director, Product Labeling and Ingredient Review, also from Registrar Corps. Thank you so much to all our speakers this morning. We look forward to the information you'll be sharing with our participants and our partners and industries on how to get their products into the US market. We'll hand over to Dr. Katz.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this seminar. What I'd like to do in about the next 10-15 minutes is talk about FDA's cosmetic program and some of our regulations and technical support and we'll finish off with compliance activities. Next slide. Basically, everybody knows that cosmetics are used by most people, consumers, every day. In fact, I like to start with this slide to just kind of put into perspective what we're talking about when we talk about the scope of cosmetics. It's been averaged or said that probably women use somewhere between about 8 to 12 cosmetic products a day, men somewhere about 4 to 6. And I've provided some examples of what we view as cosmetics in the United States. And these would include moisturizers and other skin preparations, hair care products, including hair dyes and hair straighteners, makeup, nail polishes, shaving preparations, perfumes, some toothpaste, but not all, and some mouthwashes, as well as some face and body cleansers. It's been estimated that in the United States, annual sales of cosmetics are over $70 billion. Next slide. So Well, what is the authority for cosmetics? Well, FDA's authority for the regulation of cosmetics and color additives comes from 3 acts. The first is the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and that was when cosmetics was added to the Food and Drug Act. And this provides the basis of our regulatory authority. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in several other slides. In 1960, there was a color additive amendment to the Act, which provided for the specifications for certain color additives that could be used in cosmetics as well as other FDA-regulated products. It says which kinds of testing needs to be done and what the stipulation as well as the naming of those particular color additives. In 1966, the Federal Food Packaging and Labeling Act was passed, and that actually included additional labeling requirements to what was already present in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Next slide. This slide really is just a reference slide, and it can tell you where to find the different regulations for cosmetics in the United States. That in the 21 CFR Cosmetic, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 70, and if you've ever looked at it in the actual book form, it's about a ½ inch thick, describes the different regulatory authorities. Under our general authorities, it discusses the definitions, the requirements for specific cosmetic products. For cosmetic labeling, you can find that in Part 701. For the Voluntary Cosmetic Registration Program, that's found in 710. And it's important to note here that the registration of cosmetics in the United States is voluntary, and this provides information to us both in terms of what products are on the marketplace as well as what ingredients may occur within the market and who are manufacturing those products. Under 720, you can find the voluntary filing of cosmetic product ingredient statements. And then 740 contains the different warning statements that are required to appear on the product labeling. Next slide. What I like to do, particularly as a sort of a basis, is to define cosmetics versus drugs in the United States, because the definition of cosmetics is not uniform worldwide. Cosmetics in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is defined in Section 201I as articles other than soap intended for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering appearance. And I put in other than soap because soap is an interesting commodity, is that depending upon how it's both manufactured and how it's intended to be used determines who regulates it. Soaps that are considered more of beautifying or cleansing, such as beauty bars, are cosmetics. When you talk about soap that is intended to have antimicrobial properties, it's considered a drug, and I'll define what how drugs are regulated or how drugs are defined in just a moment. Or that if it's more of a detergent and based on saponification, that it may be regulated by CPSC or the Consumer Products Safety Council. Drugs, on the other hand, in the United States are also regulated or defined in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, but in Section 201G1. And these are articles that are intended to cure, diagnose, mitigate, treat, or prevent a disease. In addition, these are articles other than food affecting the structure or function of the body of humans or animals. And it's this last clause that is critically important, because many times when you see structure function claims in other countries, those structure function claims are fine as cosmetics. In the United States, however, if you make structure function claims, that would make the product a drug, as well as potentially a cosmetic, depending upon what the other claims are on the products themselves. Next slide. So how are the drugs versus cosmetics regulated in the United States? And this slide is really just a simplistic overview of the regulations and the comparison and contrast them. For a cosmetic, we have no pre-market approval or clearance of safety or efficacy required. In fact, our authority is all post-market and for safety only. Food and manufacturing practices are voluntary. We don't have mandatory record access. We don't have mandatory establishment or product registration. And adverse event reporting is not mandatory, either for serious or non-serious adverse events. On the other hand, for over-the-counter drugs, that the over-the-counter drugs get to the marketplace either one of two ways, either through a pre-market approval process, which is the NDA process or new drug application process, or through a monograph in which the safety and efficacy has already been demonstrated in that monograph. In addition, that products that follow the monograph need to use only those ingredients that are allowed in the monograph, and the labeling is also subject to that monograph, which is different than in an NDA process where the labeling is actually approved for the particular product that gets marketed. Over-the-counter drugs are subject to good manufacturing practices by regulation, and there's mandatory record access. The establishments and products must be registered, and the products must be listed, and serious adverse events must be reported to the FDA within 15 days. Next slide. So often we're asked, can you have a product that's just a cosmetic or versus a drug, or can it be both? And really, this slide is to demonstrate that products can be cosmetics alone, can be drugs, or can be both. And I've provided certain categories in which these are both. Because the antimicrobial cleanser, the antimicrobial portion is a drug, the cleanser portion would be cosmetic. The same with an anti-dandruff shampoo, that this would be a drug indication because dandruff is treating a condition which is seborrhea, and the shampoo is for cleansing, and that's cosmetic. Anti-caries toothpaste, the anti-caries is a specific disorder, again, claim that would make it a drug. The toothpaste, which is for cleansing or freshening, would be cosmetic, as well as antiperspirant, which is a drug, and deodorant is cosmetic. So the bottom line is that if a product meets the definition of a drug, it must comply with drug requirements, even if it's also a cosmetic. The last bullet I put here is because these terms are often touted around now, but there is no legal definition in the United States of a cosmeceutical or a personal care product. In fact, cosmeceuticals probably were coined by industry to be a term that was a little bit more than a cosmetic. And if it's a little bit more than a cosmetic because it's affecting structure function, it is a drug. Personal care products is also another term that we've been hearing a lot about lately, and that encompasses not only cosmetics, but it may also include over-the-counter drugs, certain devices, and certain products that are also regulated by CPSC. Next slide. So what is FDA's authority over cosmetics? Cosmetics must not be adulterated or misbranded, and I'll explain that a little bit more in the next slide. The FDA does not have the authority, as I mentioned earlier, to approve cosmetic products or their ingredients, with the exception of color additives. Cosmetics should be properly labeled as per the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as well as the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, and our authority is all post-market. Next slide. So, what is an adulterated cosmetic? It is a cosmetic that contains poisonous or deleterious substance that makes it harmful or injurious under labeled or customary conditions of use. It may contain filthy substance. It may be prepared, packed, or held under insanitary conditions and contaminated or rendered injurious. That the container is composed of poisonous substances, rendering the product injurious. Or it may contain an unapproved color additive. I highlight here that there's the coal tar hair dye exemption, but the only color additives that are allowed to be in a cosmetic are those that are listed. And as I mentioned earlier, you can find them in the CFR. With regard to misbranded cosmetics, these make they make false or misleading labeling so that it does not contain all of the required information or contain some information in such a way that it is unclear to a consumer. The packages are unlabeled, that the labeling is improperly placed or inconspicuous, that it's in a misleading container, that the color additives other than hair dye do not conform to the applicable regulations under Section 721 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that it's non-compliant with packaging, that is, it doesn't comply with the Poison Prevention Packaging Act of 1970, and under the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, it doesn't contain the ingredient declaration so consumers can make informed purchases decisions. Next slide. So when cosmetics need to be labeled, they need to have the mandatory ingredient declaration, and this has been required since 1973. That the individual cosmetic ingredients are labeled in order of descending predominance greater than 1%. Fragrance or flavor may be declared as such without labeling the actual ingredients that go into making up either the fragrance or the flavor. In 21 CFR 701.3c, the rules for ingredient naming is highlighted. The International Cosmetic Ingredient Dictionary basically contains a list of international nomenclature, which is often referred to as INCI. And there are over 22,000 ingredients that are found in this dictionary. But the one thing I need to caution you of is that in the United States, for labeling for ingredients, we do not accept INCI nomenclature. We accept the common or usual name. We have allowed, however, for INCI nomenclature to occur parenthetically after the common or usual name. However, if the nomenclature appears as INCI nomenclature without the common or usual name, the product would be considered to be misbranded. In addition, for labeling requirements, as I previously mentioned, there are certain required warning statements. And I highlighted several of these on this slide. And they will, if you go back to look in the reference, it will tell you specifically what these different warning statements need to say. Next slide. With regard to compliance and enforcement for the domestic products and firms, we actually do have active monitoring in the marketplace. And in fact, we monitor both for what's being marketed, and we also look at what complaints we get in or adverse events that we may get from consumers, as well as complaints from competitors. And we use this information to help us to set our priorities when deciding what ingredients and products need to be assessed further. We do facility inspections. We try to average somewhere around 100 in the course of a year, which is not a lot, but we do split it up between those that are for cause and those that are routine. We will issue warning letters. We can do seizures or injunctions as appropriate to what we are finding from our inspections. And next slide. And with this, I'd like to turn over to John to continue talking about the import of cosmetics.
Thank you, Dr. Katz, and thank you all for having me here today. And good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Want to talk quickly about our cosmetic program, and specifically as it comes to imports. We can go to the next slide, please. In the U.S., we see in the latest year that we have data for, we received about 2.75 million lines, which you can consider those to be discrete shipments of cosmetic products into the U.S., and it makes up a little over 6% of our overall volume. FDA has a wide portfolio, obviously foods and drugs and cosmetics like we're talking about here. Medical devices, radiation emitting products, tobacco products, biologics. We have a lot of different things that we regulate. When it comes to cosmetics, we don't do what you would consider to be a lot on the import side as far as examinations or sampling. Although we make up 6% of the volume, they make up about 3% of our overall physical examinations that we conduct every year. When we do encounter issues, we'll generally use an import alert as a means to control future shipments of those products. Right now we have 10 import alerts in place for cosmetic products, and they tend to cover broad areas and broad issues. So some of the things that Dr. Katz mentioned about the requirements, we have an import alert specific to unapproved color additives. So these are products that we found through testing or review at the time of entry to have unapproved color additives, and we've taken steps to ensure we control future imports of those. Those that have poisonous or deleterious substances, one that's always in our mind is excessive levels of mercury or other heavy metals in cosmetic products. We have import alerts for labeling and for these filter and sanitary conditions. We will also implement our import alerts for products that have these drug claims that make the product a drug. So any of these structure or function claims like Dr. Katz mentioned, we will treat as a drug, and we have import alerts specifically for products that are labeled as drugs but don't meet those either pre-market approval or OTC monograph types of requirements. All of our import alerts are publicly available on FDA's internet site at fda.gov, and you can search for import alerts and have fun. We've got 180 or so import alerts right now, I believe. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that the requirements for these products are the same whether they're manufactured here in the US or manufactured overseas. The big difference is when we apply our regulation to these products. Dr. Katz mentioned we have an establishment inspection regime in place here in the United States. So our FDA investigators are going and conducting inspections of the manufacturers here in the States and ensuring that the products they manufacture are going to be safe for use by consumers. And imports, we will tend to apply these requirements at the time the products are being imported. So we have our investigators throughout the country at many different ports of entry, and they're conducting reviews, again, based on the import alerts. They are looking at products, collecting samples, and sending to FDA laboratories for analysis to make sure that they comply with the requirements that were discussed earlier. Next slide, please. So now, as far as the process itself, FDA works very closely with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and we coordinate on all aspects of import operations and enforcement. Customs and Border Protection is the lead authority for any imported product into the U.S. We have worked out so that CBP knows what imports reflect products that are regulated by FDA, and using our electronic system, CBP forwards those entries to FDA for us to do our checking and our reviews. And again, that's done by assessing compliance with the appropriate requirements. And we will do this for all products that enter the country. The last year we have data for, we had roughly 45 million lines of FDA regulated product come into the country. And for every one of those, FDA has to make a decision. Ultimately, those decisions boil down to two options. We will either release the product, which allows it into the US for distribution, or we will refuse admission to the product. And when we refuse admission, the product must either be destroyed unless it is exported out of the country. And we work again very closely with Customs and Border Protection to ensure that that happens. Obviously, if we have an unsafe product, we want to make sure that it's controlled, and there are penalties and fines that can be levied if an importer does not comply with the refusal of admission. Next slide, please. So during the import process, like I said, information is provided to Customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection knows what entries are FDA regulated products and provides that to FDA. And then we go through our process to determine whether or not the product comes in the country. Now I would underscore the importance during all of this process that you as an importer, if you're acting as an importer, you maintain good and close communication with your broker, with your entry filer. These are professionals who know and understand the process. They're licensed by Customs and Border Protection to handle this customs business, which encompasses also the things that are provided to FDA, and they can help you navigate this process and provide a conduit to information back and forth. Generally, FDA, during the import process, we have more communication with the broker than anybody else in the process. So, you know, once you have your broker, I just recommend a good, robust conversation and communication with them. Because you're going to give them this information that goes to Customs and Border Protection, which then comes to FDA. And we're going to use that to decide whether or not your product can come in the country. So we get this information at FDA, and based upon the data that we're provided through the electronic system, we can release the shipment right then and there. Our system is set up in such a way that we automate this process for a great number of the products that are imported that we regulate. And we also, you know, have our trained investigators to review the data, review historical information, and make decisions right then and there off of the computer screen. We may, using that information, decide that we have enough to support a detention of the product. And this, you know, this can be based upon a submission of required information. Now, for cosmetics, as was mentioned earlier, there's no approval that's required for cosmetics, and registration is voluntary. So you don't, for cosmetic products, don't really have a whole lot of specific data points that are required information other than the general, what is the product, who manufactured it, where is it going, that kind of information. Or we may find that a product being imported is subject to an import alert, and that would be sufficient for us to move forward with the detention as well. The other decision we might make off of the computer screen is that we just need more information, and we may request documents to be provided to us. Again, generally it's the broker who's going to provide those documents to us: invoices, bills of lading, things of that nature. We may be looking for, or we may decide to examine the product or collect a sample for analysis by an FDA lab. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to examinations or sampling, we have we have staff for FDA located throughout the country at various ports of entry. Roughly 500 investigators out in the field covering the entire nation and the ports of entry across the nation. They're all trained in specific techniques for examination and sample collections. And we have laboratories also throughout the country that conduct all sorts of different analyses. So they will look for, our laboratories can look for these colors and specify what colors are in the product. They can look for these poisonous or deleterious substances, or does the product contain unsafe levels of some kind of heavy metals. We can also tell from examination whether the labeling meets the requirements that Dr. Katz discussed earlier. And we also have specialists who can look at those kinds of things for technical issues. Any of these activities can uncover violations, which would lead us to detain the product. It can also show us that the product is fine, and they can lead to a release of the product. And as I mentioned very early on, these kinds of activities, when it comes to cosmetic products, we conducted roughly 5,000 times in the last year we have data for. Next slide, please. Now, detention, I mentioned a few times. FDA and the law that we enforce, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, provides FDA the authority to detain products based upon the appearance of a violation. Now, I'll say that when we conduct a field examination, or we collect a sample and have an analysis that encounters a violation, that's more than just the appearance. We have definitively identified a violation with the product. Appearance really falls into play when we have an import alert and we're using results from previous shipments and apply those results to a current shipment. But appearance is our standard of proof that we have to meet in order to detain the product. Detention, for FDA purposes, probably doesn't mean what a lot of people think when they hear the word detention. Often we think of a detention as a physical hold in a specific place that's managed and controlled. But for FDA purposes, when we're talking about imports, a detention is really an administrative process. And during this process, FDA will inform the importer that we believe we have met our standard of proof of an appearance of a violation. We will explain what that violation is. And we will also in this notice, we'll let the importer know that they have the right to provide evidence to try to refute or overcome this appearance of a violation. We'll provide, a contact point to submit this information and a deadline for getting information to FDA. So when this notice of FDA action comes to indicate detention for a product, we expect the importer or through their broker to provide to us information to try to overcome this appearance of a violation. If the information provided is sufficient to overcome that appearance of a violation, then the product can be released for distribution in the US. Or if the information is not sufficient, or if nothing is provided, the detention will stand, and then we get to a refusal of admission. An example, let's say, of providing testimony to FDA after detention is, let's say we have an import alert for microbiological contamination in a particular cosmetic product. The importer can arrange to have a laboratory test that product and show that it does not contain the microbiological contamination. We would review that information, and if it's acceptable, we would move forward with the release. Next slide, please. So if the product cannot be brought into compliance, if it's not shown or if we're not able to overcome the appearance of a violation, FDA will refuse admission to the entry. And again, products that have been refused admission must be destroyed unless they are exported out of the US. It is the importer's right to decide which remedy to take. If FDA issues a refusal of admission, Customs and Border Protection will issue a redelivery notice and indicate that the importer has 90 days to comply with that refusal. If the importer does not comply with that refusal, meaning they do not export the product out of the country or they do not destroy it, they can be subject to liquidated damages, which is 3 times the declared value of the goods, and that will have to be paid to Customs and Border Protection. Nobody wants to get to that point, obviously. And so again, I'd just say, regular communication, keep in contact with your broker to make sure that everything's being handled and taken care of, whether it's during the detention process or even post-entry process. Finally, if a product that we've refused admission to is enough of a public health concern and it has not been exported or destroyed, FDA still does have other enforcement options available, and we'll take those. We can work to seize the product because obviously if it's enough of a health concern, to us the main goal is to keep that away from consumers. That's the import process in a nutshell and very quickly running through. And I will now turn it over to Mr. Phil Hobson.
Thank you, everybody. John, thank you very much. I noticed that you mentioned twice to make sure you speak with the broker. So that is important. We're your first line of defense with U.S. Customs and FDA, so it's important that you reach out to us far in advance of considering shipping anything to the U.S., especially FDA regulated products. Next slide. Very simply, I'm assuming that everybody's going to be shipping by air freight, so this presentation mostly relies on you shipping air freight and us making sure that the shipments arrive in time and are cleared in time for the show. There are 3 documents that are important. Every time we do a customs clearance, any broker does a customs clearance, we have to have a signed power of attorney. It's a simple document. We send it to you. We walk you through it. You return it to us, and it allows us to do the clearance on your behalf. Probably the most important document that you have to complete is the commercial invoice. Our job is to make sure that you do not provide handwritten commercial invoices. We have a template that we can provide you if necessary, and that template will encourage you to answer all the questions necessary for us to clear the shipment on your behalf. The other document is the airway bill. The airway bill is prepared by your freight forwarder, the country of origin, in accordance with our instructions. Those instructions are provided by show management in the shipping guidelines or on their website, so you can refer to that. And in those shipping guidelines, you will also have recommended freight forwarders in your country of origin that can assist you with the process. Next slide. Preparation of the commercial invoice. Recall that this is the most important document. This summarizes everything that we need to submit to USDA, Customs, FDA, whoever's involved. This is where everything starts. And that commercial invoice must have the manufacturer's name and address for each product and brand name, the buyer's name and address, which will be most likely your company set up as a non-resident importer for customs purposes. Again, we walk you through this process. A clear description of the merchandise with a harmonized tariff schedule number. This is crucial. We have to have this number to determine what the requirements are for FDA, USDA customs. So if you don't know what that number is of your product, which hopefully you will, you can always visit the website there and review it and try to get the number yourself. If you have difficulties with it, you can send us the information and we'll assist you with it. As a last case scenario, we can request a binding ruling with U.S. Customs, which will give us all the information we need and give you the duty amounts that you'll be responsible for. You need to add the size and type of packing for each individual item, the gross and net weight, the value and dimensions of the packing material, and of course the country of origin for each item. With that, we take that information and key it in to the entry, to the software that presents the information to U.S. Customs, FDA, and others that are involved. Next slide. Real quickly, one of the questions we had was to describe the process, the customs clearance process. So it starts with choosing the ocean freight forwarder or the origin freight forwarder. So you're going to contact us for all document requirements for the product. You're going to work with a freight forwarder, and we're going to work with that freight forwarder to ensure all the documents are presented properly, and so that nothing is delayed when it arrives. The importance of having these discussions in advance cannot be overemphasized. Remember, John mentioned it twice in his presentation. We have to start this early. You do not want to wait till 3 weeks before the show to start these discussions. The next step is preparation of the commercial invoice for customs broker. That can be done now if you prefer. We certainly prefer that. The earlier you do that, the better. The origin freight forwarder preparation of the bill of lading. We will instruct the freight forwarder how to do it. We'll review it before export. All of this is done to avoid delays when the cargo arrives at JFK. And then we physically key in the entry information. Everything on that commercial invoice is keyed into the software that submits everything electronically to the FDA and to U.S. Customs for release. If at that time Customs or the FDA wants to examine the cargo, they will do so, and they will send a representative most likely to the airport or require a sample. Remember, this is important that we ship early. So you want to ship for the cargo to arrive at JFK 10 days prior to the show opening. That gives us the time to review, get the entry done, to pick up the cargo. And then, of course, we do the clearance, and then we pick up the cargo from the airport. We bring it into our storage facility, and we deliver it to show site in accordance with the IBS and the union schedule for a show move-in. Challenges of hand carrying products. We are not suggesting you do this. We know that people do it, but if you do hand carry, you are still required to follow U.S. Customs and FDA regulations. What line you walk through when you come into the airport is up to you, but our suggestion, and we've had this discussion before with the FDA, do not hand carry products into the U.S. Next slide. Air freight timeline. Prepare and submit the commercial invoice to PIBL by December 7th. You could do it now if you'd like. If you want to start the process now, I certainly encourage you to do so. But I think this is a good deadline for everybody to adhere to ensure that we have time to research the product and make sure that everything is done properly before exporting. By mid-January, exhibitors should begin discussions with the origin country freight forwarders and or contact PIBL for contact information of our agent in your country. The origin freight forwarder will provide a door to show site dock quote for all transportation and customs clearance services. So when you go to the freight forwarder, your freight forwarder or our appointed freight forwarder, they will contact us for our rates. We will provide them that information, and they will submit a quote to you for shipping door to show site dock. Once the freight arrives at the dock, the union labor there is responsible for taking it to your booth. You do not have to be at your booth when it arrives. When you do arrive at your booth, that is when we hope the cargo will be there. But of course, throughout the entire process, you will stay in touch with us, and we will keep you updated on whether the freight has cleared, whether it's been delivered, or even at your booth. We have representatives on show site to ensure that everything gets to the booth when you arrive. Cargo to arrive JFK 10 days prior to show move-in. PIBL will clear the cargo at the airport, pick it up, warehouse it, and deliver it to the Javits Center. And then the IBS show on-site contractor will unload the cargo and deliver the shipment to the exhibitor's booth. So all of this is a pretty easy process, but it starts with you and that commercial invoice and contacting us well in advance to ensure that everything is done correctly so that there are no delays when it does arrive. In 25 years of doing these shows, I don't know that we've ever had a shipment that's not made the show that's arrived at the port or wasn't seized for some strange reason, which is very few and far between. So with that, I would like to pass this over to Coley Anderson with Registrar Court.
Press. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Hello. I'll go through. Oh God, always happens. And it's not. You can't do it on your. You're unmuted. I know, but they're not responding. Hello. Can I be heard? Okay, perfect. Yes, okay, yeah. Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. I would first like to thank the South African Consulate General in New York and USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub for this opportunity to be here to speak to the companies of Southern Africa. And, you know, who are we? First of all, I'm Coley Anderson, and I'm here with my colleague, Anna Benavente. We've had the opportunity to partner with USAID over the last 5 years in Southern Africa, where we have presented seminars in countries like Namibia, South Africa, Mozambique, Lesotho, Mauritius Island, Botswana, Swaziland, Zambia, and Malawi. So we're super excited to be here today as our focus up to this point has always been food and beverage. And now we have Anna Benavente, our Director of Labeling and Ingredient Review, where she'll be focusing on cosmetic and drugs. So as you see on the slide here, Registrar Corp, we're an FDA compliance consulting company addressing sectors like food and beverage, medical device, drugs, tobacco, cosmetic industry, and helping these companies in a time where U.S. importers are looking to diversify their supply chain, source other unique opportunities. And I find the opportunities in Africa to be quite unique with their products and their ingredients. So without further ado, I would like to take this time to introduce Anna Benavente. She's been 10 years in the industry, assisting companies in using her analytical research experience, sorry, Anna, as a senior regulatory specialist at Registrar Corp. She's been assisting companies all over the world since 2009. And so I'd like to introduce her now, Anna Benavente.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers. We're really pleased to be able to participate today, so thank you for the opportunity. I had to laugh when I heard those great statistics from Dr. Katz about the average number of cosmetics that people use every day, because we actually did an informal survey of our company just because we were sort of curious. And our numbers sort of came back the same, although we did have a few outliers, including one person who admitted to 27 different cosmetics in a single day. So it does underscore really the volume of the market and the sheer volume of products that people use. And what an incredible opportunity that is for people who are going to manufacture and distribute these products. And of course, it also underscores the scope of FDA's jurisdiction. And so it's important that companies go in armed with the knowledge of how FDA is going to regulate these products so that they can make sure that they've got all of their ducks in a row before they start shipping. And so I'm going to touch on three main areas of regulatory compliance. We'll kind of start with a regulatory overview. I saw some questions in the Q&A about the whole cosmetic versus drug categories and how FDA delineates between the two. And so I'll be kind of reiterating what Dr. Katz had to say and, offering up some examples we encountered. And so, going to go through all of that. Then also the labeling and ingredients aspect, because even if you have all your ducks in a row, if the product itself is not compliant, then of course that's going to be a large problem when it comes to exporting. And then finish up with the FDA's voluntary cosmetic registration program, what's involved with that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with a regulatory overview for the FDA requirements for your products. Okay, so kind of going back to those regulatory definitions, which are very important. FDA tends to regulate based on the intended use of the product. And so it's important to understand where your products will fall. So cosmetics defined by law for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, and altering the appearance. And then drugs defined by law as products used in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, which is kind of the obvious part of the definition, of course, and where people tend to sometimes encounter difficulty is not understanding that there's a second part of that definition. Those products intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, cosmetic or drug, which one do you have? It's important to determine this in advance because FDA's classification of your product will dictate, of course, which rules you need to follow. So your cosmetic products and the claims made for them should only address superficial changes, not any sort of structural or functional change to the body. Because if a product has the intended use that causes it to fall under that definition of a drug, it will be regulated as a drug, even if it has no active pharmaceutical ingredient. So we encounter this fairly frequently where companies will come to us, sometimes with a detention for a drug charge, saying, but my product doesn't have an API. There's no active pharmaceutical ingredient. And often, more often than not, it's a case where FDA has used the intended use of the drug, or the intended use of the product to brand it as a drug rather than what's actually in the product itself. The other reason this is important, because the regulations for drugs are much more strict than they are for cosmetics. Next slide, please. So here's just some kind of colorful examples of what might be considered a cosmetic product. Of course, shampoo, which is going to, clean your hair, maybe soften it, moisturize it. Lipstick that's going to make you look better in most of our cases, certainly mine. It's going to alter the appearance of the body in a very superficial way. And then body wash, again, another product that's going to clean you, but not have any sort of effect on your body beyond that. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we'll contrast that with drug products. So for example, a hand sanitizer, where it's going to actively kill bacteria, to help keep us safer from infection, potential infection. A pain relief gel, potentially with menthol or camphor or a similar active pharmaceutical ingredient that's intended to alleviate pain in the muscles or on the surface of the skin. That also affecting the structure and function of the body, and therefore a drug product. Next slide, please. Now you will have products, of course, that actually have more than one function, which might include a drug function and a cosmetic function. So your shampoo, if it, for example, contains an antifungal ingredient to treat dandruff, is going to be an anti-dandruff shampoo and regulated as both a cosmetic and a drug. Of course, a lot of concerns now with sun exposure and cancer rates rising. So for example, a sunscreen lipstick is going to be regulated as a cosmetic because it's beautifying, but then also in the US regulated as a drug. This is a very important distinction compared to other countries that don't regulate sunscreens as drugs. So a sunscreen, lipstick, spray, lotion, whatever it might happen to be, if it's blocking UV rays to help protect your skin, it's a drug in the United States. Another important example would be a chapped skin or cracked skin lip balm, or products that are, intended for use for cracked heels and things like that. Because it's treating an irregular condition of the skin, it's regulated as a drug if it's making any sort of claim about chapped or cracked skin. So you might have a lip moisturizer that's regulated as a cosmetic, but the moment you start making claims about treating chapped or cracked skin or lips, it's going to become a skin protectant drug product and be regulated that way. Next slide, please. So here's some other common ones that you might encounter. Anti-acne, treating actual acne outbreaks or mitigating or preventing them would be considered a drug claim and therefore a drug product. Toothpastes that actually make anti-cavity claims and have fluoride in them are regulated as drugs. Importantly, if you have fluoride in your toothpaste, even if you don't make the claim, FDA will regulate it as a drug because that's pretty much the sole intended use of fluoride in a toothpaste. If you have a cosmetic toothpaste that only claims to clean but doesn't make the anti-cavity claims, it would be a cosmetic. Kind of similarly, deodorants that don't stop sweat are cosmetics, but an antiperspirant that prevents or mitigates sweating is regulated as a drug. Same with some of the dermatitis soaps, psoriasis creams, antibacterial body soaps and hand washes, all going to be regulated as drugs and oftentimes as cosmetics because they're cleaning as well as treating and preventing bacteria. Lice shampoos, anti-gingivitis mouthwashes, again, you've got kind of dual intended uses here, so it causes them to be drugs as well as cosmetic products. Next slide, please. Okay. Now for the pre-market requirements, I'm just going to go ahead and reiterate what Dr. Katz mentioned in her presentations. Cosmetics, there's really not a lot in terms of what FDA has in terms of authority for pre-market clearance. There's none. There's no pre-market approval for a cosmetic product. They pretty much can enter the market without any sort of FDA review. However, FDA can take action against non-compliant products. We see this very often with problems with microbiological contamination. FDA will test cosmetic products in port, so it's important to make sure that your GMPs are in order and that the products that you produce aren't going to encounter this kind of problem in port. But ultimately, the burden is on the manufacturers for ensuring that the products that they send to the US are safe. Conversely, drugs have much more stringent requirements. So if you are manufacturing or exporting a drug product, you're probably going to be subject to some establishment registration requirements. And every drug product in every flavor and every size and every manifestation is going to be subject to the listing requirements with FDA. You will want to do this before you ship. It can be done. It feels like almost daily. Our drug division is helping a company that has shipped drug products without listing them, and we're trying to get that accomplished in port. But it's always going to result in monumental delays. You risk losing your client, losing your customer in the U.S. So it's important to do this all before you ship. Drugs also are going to be subject to the specific formulation requirements that are going to be based on the category of drug that you have. And certain drugs will require product-specific FDA approval. So you're going to have to submit the labeling, clinical trials potentially, lots of data to FDA to get the drug approved. Others can be marketed if they comply with the current drug monograph for that type of product. Okay, next slide, please. So if it is a drug product, then what are you going to do? So Dr. Katz mentioned this, and I just highlighted it as well. FDA has a system of drug monographs where they write them kind of like a recipe book. That's an FDA analogy, and it's perfect because what they do is they establish a monograph for a certain category of drug based on the intended use, and then they describe the ingredients that have been deemed generally recognized as safe and effective for that exact drug product. And so as long as your product formulation complies with the terms of that monograph, then you can go ahead and market it without a specific approval. Now, if you have a product where there is no monograph established, or if you have an active ingredient that is not covered by that monograph, then you will have to go the new drug application or abbreviated new drug application route. And so this is going to be lengthy and often expensive, involving lots of supporting data and such. And so people sometimes, I think, tend to think of new drug applications as for things like cancer drugs or things that treat serious conditions. And that's almost always true, but it also can impact products that people use every day. So my favorite example is Rogaine, minoxidil. It's over the counter. We find it in Target and CVS and Walmart, but there's no monograph for that type of hair growth product. And so that product went through the new drug application, even though it's not treating a serious condition. Depends on who you ask, I guess. It might be considered a serious condition, but suffice to say, it's an over-the-counter product, but it had to go through this process. So you want to make sure that this is something that you've determined prior to shipping. Next slide, please. So for an example, if you have a product that is going to be treating acne, and you have, say, sulfur or salicylic acid, which is covered by the monograph that FDA has established at certain concentrations. So you meet those requirements, you are good to go. So you just get your registration done, your listing done, and then you can start shipping it to the United States. On the converse, though, if you have adipalene gel, that is not covered by the monograph. So even though there's a monograph for acne products, it won't meet it, and you need to stop and start investigating the new drug application process or the abbreviated new drug application process. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so move on to the labeling ingredients. Again, you want to make sure after you've determined that your product is a cosmetic or a drug that the labeling and the ingredients are all in line. So these are the mandatory labeling statements for a cosmetic. You will have your statement of identity, which is in essence the common name of the product. What is it? Is it a body wash? Is it a moisturizer for your face? What is it? You'll need to declare the net quantity of contents. So you'll need both the avoirdupois imperial measurements as well as metric. This is a common mistake, and unfortunately something that can get you detained in port if it's noticed by an inspector. You'll need to include directions for safe use, as well as any mandatory or necessary warning statements. Ingredient declarations are required for retail products as well. You'll need the corporate name and address, not just a DBA or something else, an actual corporate name and address for the manufacturer, packer, or distributor of the product. And then also there's a requirement for a prominent warning if a product or the ingredients have not been adequately tested for safety. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, if your product's a drug, if it's both a cosmetic and a drug or just a drug, then you're going to have to make sure it's labeled according to the OTC drug regulations, which are much more complex. And it includes our drug facts labeling, which is a chart that appears on over-the-counter drugs in the United States. You also have to have a mailing address or a US phone number where a consumer can report a serious adverse event. We've actually seen a lot of detentions over the summer of hand sanitizers coming in that didn't have this information, and they were detained. So you want to make sure that is there. The content of that drug facts chart is dictated by the applicable monograph or approval. And if it's also a cosmetic, then you'll want to have both OTC drug and cosmetic labeling. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just sort of a quick picture of what the drug facts panel looks like. You can see all of the information that's on there. Next slide, please. Okay, now appropriate cosmetic claims, just to reiterate what Dr. Katz was mentioning, you're going to need superficial changes to be declared: cleansing, moisturizing, covering up wrinkles. But the moment you start talking about removing wrinkles or affecting change like suppressing melanin to remove dark spots, then it's going to be regulated as a drug. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is just a quick list of some of the common issues that we find that people will put on labels, not realizing that it can cause the product to be regulated as a drug. So you want to do a very careful review of your labeling. If you see anything like this, you're going to want to remove it if your intent is to market the product as a cosmetic. Next, please. Okay. Now, organic claims are regulated by our U.S. Department of Agriculture. For cosmetics and personal care products, you'll need to be certified if you're going to use, by the National Organic Program, if you're going to use the USDA symbol. However, if you don't, you can still get them certified under other private standards. USDA will only regulate it if the USDA claim is made. Next slide, please. Now, natural claims, it's a little more kind of the wild, wild west for us. There's no formal definition established by FDA, but because they do require that labels be truthful and not misleading, you want to be very careful if you're making a natural claim. So in the context of food, FDA has a more formal position about the product not containing artificial or synthetic substances or added color, even if it's from a natural source. We have also seen, because there's a marketing advantage to marketing a product as natural, that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission has taken some action against products that claim to be natural when they included synthetic substances. So just kind of keep this on your radar. Next slide, please. Now, as far as ingredient regulation, again, FDA's authority over ingredients for cosmetic products is not as strict as it is for drug products. So the burden is going to be on you as the manufacturer to make sure that they're safe and that the product is properly labeled and that the use of the ingredient does not otherwise cause the product to be non-compliant. Next slide, please. Now, the color additives is the big exception to the rule. So you absolutely want to research your colors and make sure that they're approved for use in the United States. This approval can be limited to certain parts of the body. For example, henna is not approved for use on the skin. And so if you're using it in a temporary tattoo, that's not okay. If you're using it in a hair dye, then it is okay. And so products containing unapproved colors are considered adulterated. And this is not a problem you can fix in port. So they are going to be refused entry into the United States. So you want to do a double check before you send. Any sort of product that has, for example, patent blue 5, Ponzo 4R, adulterated and can't be brought into the United States. Also, certain product or certain color additives require what is called batch certification. So for example, Allura Red that's commonly used, if it's going into a product that is destined for the US market, it has to be certified by the FDA and designated as FD&C Red number 40. And the labeling should bear that as well. So if you declared it as Allura Red and an FDA inspector takes a look, they're going to see that, assume it's not certified, and consider the product adulterated. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, FDA has a voluntary cosmetic registration program, but no mandatory registration. Next slide, please. Okay, now what it is, absolutely 100% voluntary. I saw a question in the chat about, can I ship when I don't have the registration? There's no mandatory registration, so you can start shipping without VCRP. It's a reporting system for manufacturers and packers and distributors of retail cosmetic products. Now, manufacturers and packers can register their establishments. Distributors may not, but all three can file a cosmetic product ingredient statement after the product has $1,000 in annual gross US sales. So at that point in time, you can go ahead and file your CPIS if you wish. Next slide, please. But it's important to understand what it's not. Again, not mandatory. Importantly, not to be used as a marketing tool. You know, you don't want to put your VCRP information on any sort of marketing brochures. You absolutely should not claim that it's an FDA approval of your product. And know that it can't be used for professional use only type cosmetics, hotel samples, you know, freebie giveaways, or bulk cosmetic ingredient shipments. Okay. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. A special thank you to all the panel members. A special thank you to all the panel members for affording us this opportunity and sharing your expertise about the cosmetics and beauty products sector. We're now going to move into the Q&A session. I noticed that in the Q&A box, both Phil and John have been responding to some of the questions that have been presented. So if our participants haven't had an opportunity to view that, you can move to the Q&A box and see if some of the questions you might have been responded to. However, there are questions that we would like to share with you that have been asked on the platform. I will ask them, and as soon as I've asked them, we will allow the specific panel member or speaker to then come on board and give a response to those questions. The questions will also be asked in sets of 3. We don't have enough time, but we'll try and get in as many questions as possible. The first 3 questions, the first one is from Sfiso Mtunu from Zora Brands, and it's a question to Dr. Katz. He wanted to know, the FDA suggests that we should get a broker in the USA to help us distribute our products. How do we get in contact with the right brokers? I think that's also a question that Phil can respond to. Question 2 from Dr. Georgia to Mr. John Verbeerten. Kindly give an example that might have come from Southern Africa or one that you might look for beyond labels. Can you expand more on drug claims? The local economy has many labels with illegal claims. And the last question for this set is from Larry Yon to Dr. Katz. Is Dr. Katz saying cosmetics from South Africa to the US needs to be FDA approved? Can she direct us to a US source that can help with that? Dr. Katz, if you are able to, may you please just come on screen once more and assist us with the questions that have been presented.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think that some of these questions have been actually answered in subsequent discussions. With regard to the broker, I'm going to defer that to Mr. Hobson. With regard to approval of cosmetics, if I said it was approved, then I may have misspoken, but I didn't think I did. Cosmetics are not approved. Cosmetics are regulated in the United States post-market only, so that there is no approval process. And with regard to the registration, again, in my talk as well as subsequent talks, I emphasize that there is no required registration for cosmetic products in the United States. It's done voluntarily. So I hope that that addresses those 3 questions.
Thank you, Dr. Katz. We'll just hear from our participants while we move on to the next set of questions. Mr. Hobson?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, good. The question about the broker, if these are going to be general cargo shipments not for a trade show, it generally depends on the terms and conditions of the purchase, the Incoterms. So that will determine who is responsible for the customs clearance. It is generally done under the buyer's name in the United States, but it can be done under a non-resident importer from overseas. So it really depends on the terms of sale with your client in the U.S. and who is responsible for which services. But either way, if the person asking the question, if they want to send me an email, I can pursue that with them. But in general, it is the U.S. buyer's customs broker that clears the shipment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hobson. The second set of questions, also very related. We've got a question from Elise Moano and Nomti Sechale, which is open to all panel members, but particularly the FDA colleagues. On the slide about cosmetics versus drugs, does the term drugs apply to natural vitamins, supplements, for example? What about natural herbs such as moringa, aloe, and cannabis? Can indigenous natural products, marula oil, Kalahari seed oil, be exported to the US as an input for cosmetics products? That's question one. The second question is from Mavis Mukaloba to Mr. Sim Dube. Can Mr. Dube please share the names of the two representatives from Botswana he mentioned? Dr. Katz and Mr. Verbieten, the first question is for you.
John, do you want to start off with the first part of it, and then I can fill in? I don't hear him, so I guess I can go ahead and get started. That for some of the products or some of the ingredients that were mentioned, it depends on how they're intended to be used, whether or not they can be used within the product itself or not. And again, as you've heard, that for a cosmetic to be sold in the United States, it really needs to fit the definition of a cosmetic. If ingredients are being added to affect the structure or function of the product or to result in some kind of a disease claim or modification, then they would be considered a drug, even if they're also a cosmetic. But I see that John is now on, and I don't know if you'd like to expound further.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. As Dr. Katz said, it depends on if the products are cosmetics. Really, I got from the tone of the question that now we're talking about dietary supplements, things like that, which are a totally different part of FDA. They're actually considered food products. For whether or not the specific herbs are allowed in the cosmetic products, I believe, and Dr. Katz, maybe you even touched on this, ingredients are often not allowed, but they are then otherwise okay to use. I think the cannabis question and anything having to do with CBD or THC is up in the air, and I wouldn't presume to start walking down that particular path. So it's probably a more complicated question than it looks.
Right, and I'd just like to emphasize again that the bottom line is that you really need to pay attention to what it is you're trying to market as a cosmetic and what kind of claims you're making with it. Because if the claims really go beyond what a cosmetic would be, then you're in another realm, and you have to follow the regulations for whatever particular thing you may be marketing, be it a dietary supplement or a drug.
Thank you very much, Dr. Katz and Mr. Verbieten. The next set of questions, there's a question that was also asked by Ms. Teresa Mola to Phil Hobson. What happens to products after the trade show? And the second question to Dr. Katz and Mr. Verbeeten. Are tooth whitening toothpastes regarded as cosmetics or drugs? Oh, we can start with Mr. Hobson and then move on to Dr. Katz and Mr. Verbeeten. There you go.
Okay, thank you. That is that's kind of hard to unmute myself. So the question after the show, you could leave it there if you wanted to. My suggestion would be, hopefully you will have found a distributor or a potential distributor that you can give it to and let them leave the show with it. Or you can ship it back to the country of origin, which I don't think you want to, have that expense. But those are the three options.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Dr. Katz and Mr. Verbeeten, are tooth whitening toothpastes regarded as cosmetics or drugs?
Well, again, this is another area in which, depending upon what the claims are and what's in the product, potentially it could be a drug, it could be a drug cosmetic, or it could be a cosmetic. So there's no one real simple answer as to where it would which category it would fall into. We've considered that under the cosmetic, if it's just there to make the teeth appear whiter or brighter, then it would be cosmetic. If you're talking about affecting the structure or function, then it would be a drug, even if it also may have some cosmetic claim. And actually, the one thing I should say is some products may actually, in fact, be prescription products and be available only to a healthcare practitioner, meaning a dentist. But depending upon what's in the product and what its intended purpose may be, some may be professional use products only.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katz. Mr. Verbeeten, would you like to add?
I have nothing further to add to what Dr. Katz said. That covers the question, I think.
Thank you so much. The next set of questions from Mr. Sifiso Mgunu and Christine Masemola to Mr. John Verbeeten. Where can we find a list of approved color additives? 1. 2, what are the regulations for color cosmetics, makeup lines? The next question from Dr. Georgia to all panelists. What does it mean to be registered post-market only? What does it mean to be registered post-market only? And from Nomti Sechale to Mr. Verbeeten, may you kindly share some information on packaging requirements for exports to mitigate damages from happening if there are any?
I think I could handle the last one. I'd defer to Dr. Katz about the location of the color additives and things like that. That question, I'm presuming that question has to do with, whether or not there are specific packaging or marking or labeling requirements when a product is refused and needs to be exported out of the country to mitigate any kind of liquidated damages. And the quick answer to that is no. What would happen is at a refusal of admission, there would be coordination with Customs and Border Protection and or FDA to export the product out of the country. Generally, it's with Customs and Border Protection, just so we can verify that the product is actually being exported. But there's no other marking or labeling, packaging requirements that go along with that. They just have to be exported out of the country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Verbeeten.
And with regard to the color additives, you can find information about them in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in Chapter 7, Section 721. You can also go into 21 CFR, Part 70 through 82. The Part 70 is Part 70 is contains the general provisions. 71 describes the petition process. 73 describes the colors that are exempt from certification. 74 gives the listing subject to certification. 80 has the fees if you're actually selling the color additives themselves. 81 gives the general specifications needed to manufacture the pigments. 82 gives the provisional listings.
Thank you, Dr. Katz. Any other responses from panel members? I can move on.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you, Anna.
Yes. I heard in your original set of questions, one of the companies asked how they could get assistance with FDA regulations. And I wanted to point out that's what we do. Registrar Corp assists companies all over the world. We have 20 offices. We have one office located in Africa, Southern Africa in Cape Town. So if the companies do need assistance, we can do that. You know, Anna, her areas of expertise include import alerts, detentions. We hope we don't have to do that, but product formulation requirements and labeling for cosmetics, over-the-counter drugs, and so on. So we are very equipped to assist these companies. We're based here in Virginia. Our corporate office has 175 employees here. So any assistance that's needed, please reach out to us and we would be happy to guide them with the regulations.
Thank you so much, Cody.
And one additional thing is if you're actually want to register in the VCRP and you have help, you need some help with getting around the system, you can feel free to contact my office. And we do help people walk through their initial registration if they have problems. We encourage the registration to be done electronically. And in fact, we get very few paper requests anymore. That basically about 99.5% of our registration is done online, which makes it easier both for us and for others who want to register using the VCRP.
Thank you so much for that added information, Dr. Katz. Just our last set of questions before we close our webinar. There's one question, and this one is directed to the Natural Products Association of Botswana. Do you have other contacts that are not manufacturers, or are the two names mentioned the only representatives of the association? How does one get in touch with them? The second question from Uneile Kweni to Mr. Phil Hobson. Apart from stability, microbiological and packaging tests, what are the other tests needed to be on the trade show? And the last question from D.R. Thompson, could you please advise refragrances? For the Botswana question, I think it will be is it Dr. Dagmar? Dr. Dagmar?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello. My name is Stephanie Hummer. I'm representing the Norway. He's in the field at the moment. So I'm the technician of management. We are a Namibian cosmetic, basically not Botswana. So I'm not sure why the Botswana question is asked or what it actually wants.
Okay. Sorry, okay, Dr. Georgia. Dr. Georgia? I think the question on Botswana would be directed to you.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Okay, the question was, are there other representatives, let me quickly go back to it, in Botswana, contacts that you could share with the participants that they can get in touch with? Or are those the two names mentioned the only representatives?
Oh, no, absolutely not. The Natural Products Association of Botswana is the major association. Tande Labatse Zulu is the president. And inquiries can be directed to her. If you Google Natural Products Association of Botswana, I think you'll find us. And what I and Tutu Etsko have been working on is forming a section of the Natural Products Association of Botswana that would be for natural cosmetics. So if you're interested in that, we have the approval of the board of the Natural Products Association of Botswana to form this section, and it is assumed that there would be other sections. So Mavis, if you're looking at honey, I'm not sure whether, whether you're in food or cosmetics, because certainly the wax and other things would go into cosmetics. Or maybe you join both sections. So contact Tande Labatse Zulu, and I will try to get her email posted here shortly.
Thank you so much. The last question to Mr. Phil Hobson. Apart from stability, microbiological, and packaging tests, what are the other tests needed to be on the trade show?
That is going to probably be best answered by registrar. It's not going to matter whether it's for a trade show or general cargo. The requirements are the same for both. So there are no special tests for trade show commodity shipments.
Could you repeat the question once more, please?
Okay, no problem. Apart from stability, microbiological, and packaging tests, what are the other tests needed to be on the trade show?
So I can't speak to the trade show per se, again, because we're not directly connected to the trade show, and the burden of safety is on the manufacturer to conduct tests that they deem necessary. So it may very well depend on the type of cosmetic that you're talking about, whether it also is categorized as a drug product at the same time. So, I would encourage people, if they have questions of that nature, to reach out. We have a live chat function on our website, so it's open 24 hours a day, but that can be kind of product specific. So I would encourage anybody with those types of questions about that or labeling and so forth to go ahead and just reach out to us with specifics.
So much, Ms. Anna Benavente. I think we've reached now the end of our Q&A session. We apologize for not having responded to all of the questions that were shared with us. What we will do is we'll send the relevant speakers some of the questions that have been shared, and once we receive the responses, we will then share them with the participants. We would like to now share with you the contact details of our speakers on the screen. And just a quick reminder to say that the webinar, the recording of the webinar will also be shared with participants, and also USAID country representatives' contact details. With that said, please note that the slides for this presentation and previous or past presentations will be, you can also be found from www.satihub.com. We will also share this particular one with SatiHub for further distribution. Before I hand over to the Consul General to give us his closing remarks, I would like to take this opportunity to draw your attention to upcoming webinars that will be hosted by USAID Trade Hub and the dates of the webinars. With that, I would like to welcome Consul General Mutumisi Tawana back to the floor to give us his closing remarks. Thank you once again for indulging us today.
Thank you, Program Director. I thank all the panel members for the insightful presentations that they gave. I learned a lot about this industry, which men tend to take for granted, and I think I'm better informed, and I'm sure many participants also learned a lot. I think it was an instructive webinar. So I thank all the panel members, the participants for their participation, for the sharing of very useful information that will be to the advantage of particularly South Africa-US trade and all the individuals that are in the industry. Hopefully, it will help open the floodgates, so to speak, in terms of opportunities that South Africans that want to export their products to the US. Hopefully, this will enlighten them about how best to export their products and to participate in future shows. So I thank from the bottom of my heart all participants, panel members, and I thank you in particular yourself, program director, for managing this program so well, and I'm very also grateful for all the questions that were asked that are, I believe were adequately answered, and they shed light on the way forward for service providers and those that are interested in exporting their items and products into the United States. We look forward to many other webinars and hosting an in-person event in the near future once the pandemic is behind us. Thank you so much, and all the best, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Consul General. A big thank you to our speakers, to the Consul General, Dr. Tasu, and especially our partners for making this event possible. To the participants, thank you for joining and asking the questions that you did. Have a wonderful evening and a good day. Goodbye.
Bye.